Welcome to the Becoming SuperHuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Before we get started, I want to ask you, what would it mean for you to be able to double or even triple your memory and ability to learn? So many people tell us that this skill would be absolutely life-changing for them, but they just don't have the time. They just don't have the time. So that's why we have developed, my team and I, a 5-day memory mastery crash course where we go into all the fundamental neuroscience and the actual techniques that are used by the world's best memory athletes and world record holders. It's a course that we value at $97, but here's the thing. We are actually giving this course away completely for free. All you have to do to enroll in the course is visit jle.vi/5. That's jle.vi/5. Before we get started, I want to ask you a question. Every single week, we bring you these episodes full of dozens of skills, habits, routines, and strategies to help you become more superhuman. Now, be honest. What percentage of those things are you actually able to implement in your life? Of course not. You need the accountability and community. And that's why in 2018, I launched the Becoming SuperHuman Mastermind. Every month, as a community, we invite a world-renowned expert in to lead a 1-month challenge. Past challenges have included environmental design with Benjamin Hardy, hacking your sleep with Nick Littlehales, who is Cristiano Ronaldo's own sleep coach, and meditation with Muse founder Ariel Garten. On top of that, we send out a care package with all the gear and goodies you need to complete that month's challenge. And best of all, as a member, you get exclusive discounts to all kinds of events, courses, supplements, and gear. And those discounts alone are worth more than your entire membership. Look, as a listener of this podcast, we know that you stand to benefit a great deal from being in the group, but also that you stand to contribute a lot. And that's why we're offering 50% off your first month. To join, visit superhuman.blog/mastermind today. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to this week's episode. You guys, I just got off the phone with two incredibly smart authors, Brad Stulberg and Steve Magness. They are the co-authors of the new and highly anticipated book, The Passion Paradox, a guide to going all in, finding success, and discovering the benefits of an unbalanced life. Now, you guys know that I am passionate about passion, but we've actually never had anyone on the show talk about passion as a field of study or a field of becoming superhuman. And so I wanted to have these two gentlemen on the show, and I learned that this is really an emerging field which is still not so well understood, similar to the way flow states were 20 or 30 years ago. So we talked about passion and how it is such an ambiguous, kind of misunderstood area of the human experience. And we set aside some time and really understood where those misconceptions are, how people perceive passion, why passion is important in your life, and most importantly, I think, how you can actually go about getting more passion in your life. I know it sounds so ambiguous, but there are ways that you can do it and strategies that actually really surprised me. Another thing that surprised me about this episode was what I learned about recovery. We've talked about recovery a lot on this podcast, and especially in the Becoming Superhuman Mastermind, where Benjamin Hardy did a whole segment on recovery. Well, Brad and Steve gave me some really incredible ideas for how I can supercharge my own recovery periods so that I bounce back faster from long working days or recording days like this one. I really enjoyed this episode, and I know you are going to as well. So without any further ado, Brad Stulberg and Steve Magness. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. How are you guys doing?
Doing well, man. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. I have to admit, full disclosure, start the podcast with a little vulnerability. Today, I'm feeling less than passionate about my third or fourth podcast interview. So I'm glad that at least we're going to talk about passion and how I can discover the passion for the third or fourth podcast interview of the day.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll be able to solve that problem. The answer might be schedule 1 or 2 a day, but we'll work on it.
I'm just teasing you guys. Now, tell us a bit, first off, about the both of you and a bit about what you do and how you got into it.
For sure. So this is Brad talking first. I am a coach to entrepreneurs and executives and a writer, and I write about the science and art of human performance. I'm really interested in what makes people tick and how they can perform well and live well and with health at the same time.
And I'm Steve Magness. So I got into things from a running background. I was a fairly good runner growing up, ran a 4-minute mile. And then now what I do is I'm more of a performance coach and kind of a science expert on some of these things, on mixing between athletic performance and then also kind of human psychology performance for executives and other things like that.
Very cool. So you both come really from a coaching background, athletics and a coaching background. And at some point, you guys got interested in this idea of passion. Tell me about that.
So our interest in passion actually started out as a bit of like a self-reflection. So our first book, which is called Peak Performance, that came out about 2 years ago, we had written that book and sent our publisher the manuscript. And there was a bit of a queue and a backup at the publishing house. So they didn't get edits when they thought they would. Steve and I live in different areas. So we had scheduled like 10 days of shoulder to shoulder time to go through all the edits, but there were no edits. And instead of like sipping on bourbon and going on vacation, we were like, well, like shit, we got to like do something. Like, let's start the next book. And then we kind of looked at each other and we're like, well, why do we have like this urge to keep pushing? And is it a good thing to have this urge? It is a bad thing to have this urge. Is it neither? And then we kind of like, again, started exploring, well, is this passion? And if so, should we be able to chill out? Shouldn't we? And that kind of self-reflection became, we basically had our cake and ate it too, right? We're like, we want to figure this out and we want to write. So let's write about it.
That's so cool. And by the way, how did you guys meet if you're not in the same area? Tinder?
Yeah, it's
Just
one
kidding.
of the modern technology things is we actually met via Twitter. We were exploring similar ideas, me more so in like the physical capacity of performance, Brad in like the mind capacity of performance, but doing so in similar ways. And Brad reached out to me and said, hey, I read some of your stuff. Like, do you want to talk about some of these ideas? And that became a magazine article. And then we went back and forth exchanging ideas. And we're like, hey, we're thinking along the same lines. And then that eventually led to our first book and then now our second book. So it's kind of one of those things that wouldn't have occurred unless we had the wonderful world of social media.
That's really, really cool. And I imagine you guys didn't meet face to face until a long time into the collaboration, right?
Totally. It was almost like this online dating app, right? Like you match and then you email and then you phone and then you FaceTime and then Steve like rolls up into the East Bay. And I guess in the time it was San Francisco. And I'm like, oh, hope I like get along with this dude because we got to write a book together.
Wow. That's rad. Now, tell me about what you found, because my whole objective for this interview is just to learn from you guys about this idea of passion. Because I think, every guest that we've had on the episode out of 225 plus guests is passionate, but I've never talked to someone who focuses on understanding how we go about getting passion. What does passion mean for us? How do we spark passion? Do we have to have passion to succeed? So I'm just going to turn it over to you guys and give me your whole spiel,
Yeah, we'll do it. So the book is called The Passion Paradox. And the reason that we chose that title is because more or less everything about passion is a little bit paradoxical. It's not very straightforward. And this is so counter to common culture where it's like, find and follow your passion, you'll have a good life. So the three main paradoxes of passion that we found, and this is more or less the arc of the book, the first one is that you don't magically find your passion. And if you expect to, you actually end up in this mode where you're kind of seeking, going from one thing to the next. The second main paradox of passion is that when you're following your passion, it can't be a passive thing. If you don't control your passion will control you. So this notion of like, oh, I've got passion, my life's going to be great. Maybe, but passion also has this enormous dark side. And then the third paradox is the two most common tropes in all of self-help are probably to find and follow your passion and be balanced. Those two things are like inherently antithetical. So if you're passionate about something, like your brain chemistry changes in a way that is actually quite similar to addiction, and you are not balanced. But a lot of passionate people report being really happy. Meanwhile, balance is a good thing to strive for. So how do you reconcile these two things? And we can go deeper into those in whatever order you want. But those are the three main paradoxes. And then the fourth, like sub-paradox that we link to passion not always being great is that the more you care about something, the harder it is to move on when the time comes to move on. So you can be super passionate about your job, about a hobby, but then when it comes time to retire, or let's say you're an athlete and you get injured, or you're an entrepreneur and your company gets acquired, a lot of really passionate people suffer with mental health challenges when they can no longer do the thing that they love.
Wow, this is so pertinent. I was just in Genius Network last week, and we had a breakout session where everyone in the room who'd sold a business, myself included, talked about what that was like and how that's supposed to be this big windfall moment of success. But it's like, actually, even if you didn't like the business, you lost something that you had to be passionate about, and how that can cause such severe kind of like psychological issues of identity and drive.
Exactly. You're spot on. And that's what it actually is. If you look at the research and talk to individuals like yourself who have gone through that, it's almost like you're losing part of yourself. And it's this identity component where we put so much work, so much effort, so much of who we are into the activity that we did, whether that's building a business or, being a runner or writer or whatever have you, that once it's gone, it's like, oh, what do I fill this hole with? And that's what one of the parts of the book is really about is how do we almost like anticipate that? And then how do you prepare for that? Like, how do you set yourself up so that, hey, I'm selling this business that I created, that it was my baby. What do you replace that with? Like, how do you find another interest that can become a passion?
Mm-hmm. Now, before we hit the recording, you told me that most people are walking around with some pretty serious misconceptions about what passion actually is.
Yeah. So if you were to ask someone what passion is, they would say it's like this great enthusiasm and zeal that you have for something, and that if you are passionate, that is a good thing. And that can be true. But again, like I said earlier, passion also has a dark side. So this is a subtle difference, and I'll do my best to explain it here quickly in the best interest of time. Mm-hmm. There's something called harmonious passion. This is the good kind of passion. This is when you're passionate about the activity that you're doing. You love doing the work. You love the community that you're doing the work in. Then there's something called obsessive passion. This is when you actually become more passionate about the external validation and the external results than the work itself. So this is the difference between someone that loves writing versus loves being on the Amazon bestseller list, or the entrepreneur that loves doing the work versus the entrepreneur that just wants to be known and relevant in their field. And I say that it's a trap because what almost always happens is people start out with harmonious passion, right? You get into something, you cultivate an interest, it becomes a passion, you love it. And then if you love what you do and you're somewhat talented, you start performing well. Well, what happens when you perform well? You get all kinds of external validation. And that's the slippery slope of suddenly you're spending more time and more energy thinking about and chasing the external validation and the recognition than actually loving the work itself. And that's dangerous because at some point, like, you're going to fail. Or even if you don't fail, like, you can only get so successful. And it's almost like an addiction. Once you achieve something, you have to achieve something else to feel good. And that is just an emotional roller coaster that buries so many entrepreneurs, so many athletes, so many creative types. Basically, like your entire podcast audience, at some point in their life, has probably gone through this roller coaster because it's very natural. And what we're trying to do with this book is help people be more aware of it so that either they prevent it altogether or they lessen some of the swings so that they're not as stark.
I love that. And I want to hear more. Obviously, we're going to encourage people to check out the book, but the subtitle of the book is A Guide to Going All In, Finding Success and Discovering the Benefits of an Unbalanced Life. I think that was one of the things that most turned me on about interviewing you guys is I'm all about an unbalanced, messy life. So how do I go all in and how do I find success and how do I discover the benefits of this unbalanced life?
That would be a very long topic, but I'll try and keep it succinct. So I think one of the misconceptions, as Brad mentioned earlier, is that, you know, in order to be successful and happy, like our life has to be balanced. Like we have to be the best at our job, the best at our family, the best friends that we, you know, could have, you know, all these other things. And that's just unrealistic. And what you see is that there are periods of time where you have to go all in on your passion. Like you have to say like, hey, I'm launching a book or I'm launching a startup and these other things, like they don't matter that much to me right now. And that's totally fine. And I think where people get it wrong is they sit there and say like, no, I have to have this perfect balance and they try and do too many things. And what happens is you get mediocre at a bunch of different things. And the thing that you really wanted to be great at, it gets dragged down because you're spreading yourself too thin. So what we encourage people to do is like give yourself permission to like go all in, but also have the self-awareness to like step back and look and say, hey, is this where I want to be at this moment? Because you want to be almost obsessive about your work during, as I said, a critical period of your startup. But you know, if you're 6 months in or a year in and it's not as big of a deal, like you might not want to be neglecting some of these other things. So you might want to step back a little bit. So it's about really being intentional about when you're doing that, going all in period.
I really like that because, you know, one of the skills that's been so powerful to me and one of the tools that's been so powerful to me is this idea of the wheel of life, where you break your life down into 8 things from friends and family to physical environment, romance, career, financial, all these other things, right? And the goal of the exercise is obviously to maximize everything. And it's this idea that a wheel doesn't roll if it looks like a Pac-Man or if it only, you know, it looks like this bulging wheel. But there are times in life, practically, where, look, I'm fundraising for my startup and everything else is going to have to shift. So I love that idea of being conscientious about it and saying, okay, overall, I'm going for this idea of balance. And if something's missing in my life, I obviously want to add that in. But being conscientious and going, I'm going to sacrifice here so that I can get there, I think is really prudent.
Yeah, for sure. And just thinking of balance, like not in any given day or week or month or maybe even year, but perhaps like thinking of balance over the course of a lifetime. So a lot of passionate people with really good lives that, of course, like there's always some roller coaster ride, but at the end of the day, they sit back and they feel good about it. They actually tend to be super balanced, but they're balanced over 70 years, not over like any given week or month.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's also huge. I'm learning so much of the next level of success in life often comes from being proactive as opposed to reactive. And so if you're proactive in the way that you plan to sacrifice here or there instead of reactive, there's a huge difference there. And it doesn't seem like it because at the end of the day, the result on the ground may actually be the same, but proactively going, okay, I'm going to plan ahead and I'm not going to take any vacations in the next 2 months, as opposed to, oh my God, I just don't have time to take a break. There's a whole different mindset around that. It has different, I think, associations and it has different repercussions. So kind of being proactive also allows you to take that longer term view and holistically form a more balanced picture when you look at life in the big picture.
For sure. I mean, you're spot on. And I love that philosophy of like the 8 prongs and whether it's 8 or 5 or 4, who knows? Like that probably depends on how you divide and conceptualize the world. But I love that idea of like the wheel has got to roll. The only like super practical thing that I would add is I'd say like at least once a month, get out in nature, or like watch a biography on someone that like is an artist, or just put yourself in the way of beauty or awe, because there's something about stepping out of the inertia of what you're going all in on that can really help you gain perspective. And it's after those moments that you're better able to evaluate, like, is this the right trade-off? Am I devoting energy to the right part of the wheel right now? Because the trap there is like when you're doing the thing and you've got all that inertia and momentum, you kind of have to step outside it to be able to evaluate wisely. Even just like a long run, just something where you're disconnected and in nature is a wonderful way to go about that. And there's all kinds of research that shows that spending time in nature helps you gain perspective and make good decisions.
So true. And it's so important to get outside of our routine. I mean, I'm sure you guys can tell it from the passion side and the rejuvenation side. I can tell it from the neurochemistry side that when you're in unique locations, your neurochemistry actually changes. There's more dopamine in the CA3 region of the brain, and the locus coeruleus lights up, and all these different things whenever you go into new environments and you get new stimulus. So literally, if you want to think differently about the challenges you're facing, especially if that's what am I passionate about, what am I excited about, there's no better way to change your brain chemistry, besides drugs, obviously, than to get into new and novel environments that inspire and awe you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I don't know exactly how the brain chemistry changes in nature, but like it totally does, because you feel different, and how you feel and your brain chemistry are the same thing. So yes, get outside.
Get outside, people, please. Now, that actually brings up another question, which is when you guys sat down to write this book, I mean, I know there's a lot of research going on about flow states. There's a lot of research going on about memory. There's a lot of research going on, obviously, about psychology of work and stuff like that. Is there research being done about passion, or was it hard for you to find kind of academic sources and actual studies that are being done on passion? It feels and seems a little bit like it's still an ambiguous concept to a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a good question. There is research. It's led by a researcher named Robert Vallerand, who's done a lot of work in this area. And I think like he's been the pioneer because it is such an almost like nebulous concept. And it's not like this broad-based research area that has a bunch of different people attacking it. It's like him getting the field going is kind of what happened. And once we dug into that, like there's a fair bit of stuff. It's just you have to deep dive. And it's actually his work that pointed us towards this harmonious versus obsessive passion. And what's interesting now is they're at maybe where some of the flow state or psychology stuff was 5-10 years ago, and that they're trying to start looking at some of this like neurochemistry. Mm-hmm. For instance, there's an interesting study that looked at if your temperament, which is tied to your dopamine sensitivity, is linked to whether you're more likely to have like more passion or be more obsessive or harmoniously passionate. And that's in the early stages. But what they have shown is that like if you're super sensitive to dopamine, then you have a higher likelihood of exhibiting some of these linkages to passion, right? Because, you know, it's almost like going back to that addiction model that is similar to passion, where if we get those dopamine hits, not by doing drugs, but by doing the work that we're doing, then all of a sudden we get into this almost routine of like, oh, I need that next hit. I need to go back to my work, or I need to go write or go run or whatever my passion is. So it's starting to come around.
So cool. So cool. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, today we all know about flow states, and Stephen Kotler has done a lot to get that in front of people's faces. And I feel like this is something that really is only starting to be understood. It sounds like you guys are very much on the vanguard of it. So very, very cool. Now, in your book, you talk about this idea, and you mentioned it before as well. People don't just stumble on their passion. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask, because I know a lot of young people listening to the show are asking themselves, like, what can I do to find that passion? And or realizing, hey, this thing that I did a degree in, or this career that I started out, I don't think I'm passionate about it. I want to be as passionate about it as Steve and Bradley are about writing their book. So any homework that you can give people. I mean, I know I'm asking you to give away all the secrets, but any homework that we can give people to kind of start down this journey of discovering that right kind of passion that you guys mentioned.
So the first thing is the simplest, and that is just to understand that the data shows very clearly that about 75 to 80% of people have a mindset that they will find the perfect thing immediately. This mirrors love and romantic passion. So 75% of people think that there's a perfect soulmate for them. Yet the truth is that only about 20% of people find an activity that they're immediately passionate about. The other 80%, they follow an interest and they let good enough be good enough at first, and they give it some time to see if it's a fit. So just changing that mindset is like 80% of the battle, because what happens is you come out of college and you're told you have to find a passion, and then you set this expectation that you have to find something that's perfect. And like very few things are perfect right from the get-go. So then you get in this seeking mode where you're going from one thing to the next, trying to find something that feels perfect right away. And the minute that it doesn't feel great, you quit. And again, this mirrors so much of what's happening with millennial and even the younger generation in dating. Is there's this expectation that I'm going to find the perfect match. And now that there's all these online dating apps, you feel like, well, I'm connected to billions of people, so someone's got to be perfect. And people go from one person to the next with this expectation of perfection versus a mindset of growth and development, which is like, hey, this seems interesting. Like lower the bar from passion to interesting, and then follow that interest. Give it a month or two, pay attention to it, and see if it will develop into a passion. What we found in researching the book is so many people quit too soon.
Right. That is really, really interesting, and definitely parallels my own experience as well. I think that's probably a huge takeaway for a lot of people is like, you know, I often say the best relationships are the ones where you don't fall head over heels. And I did a whole blog post about how I got to know my wife and how this was not a head over heels, love at first sight moment. And actually it was a slow getting to know, getting to understand, rational decision to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And it sounds like it's the same way with passion.
Totally. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because my wife and I were like very close friends in undergraduate school, and even spent a summer together, like living in the same house when we were working in the same city when we were 21, 20, and nothing happened. And then it wasn't so rational because like 3 years later we were hanging out and there was some drinking involved, and like now we're married with a kid. So I get that, man.
That's awesome.
And you know what? It's funny. Like this, Steve and I took the same path into writing, or at least I certainly did, and Steve to a large extent, as I did into my marriage with Caitlin. And that is like, I never said like, I'm going to be a writer. Like I wrote a blog post and I'm like, this felt like good. I like doing this. And then I just kept on writing. And then some people asked me to write and I wrote a little bit more, but it took like 6 years before I could say like, this is the thing that I'm passionate about. And if I would have gone into it expecting it to be great right away, there's no way I would be writing now.
That's a really great insight as well. The last piece that you added. And, you know, when I interviewed Zach Evans, who's like one of the top piano superhuman teachers in the world and a very gifted musician, he said a phrase that has really stuck with me from his coach, which is fun is when you're good, right? It's very hard when you're starting out and you're still in the middle of the learning curve. Even if you're a super learner and you enjoy learning, it's hard to have fun when you suck at something. And in the beginning, you suck at pretty much anything that you try. There's very, very few things that you can just pick up the golf club and all of a sudden hit a hole in one. And so fun is when you're good, and it takes a hell of a lot of time to get good at most things.
I love that. I think that's spot on. And that just goes back to expectations, right? If you come into and think that something is going to feel easy at the beginning and like just click, you're just setting yourself up to failure. And that's why we always suggest it's like explore your interests, but give yourself enough time to see if you can actually develop in them, right? Because one of the main thing that keeps us motivated, and we know this from psychology research, is competency. So whether you can keep showing progress and all that good stuff. And if you just try it a couple times and then say, no, this isn't for me, you never know if it's going to develop. If you give yourself a couple months to actually dive deep into something and say like, all right, I'm going to really see if I can get good at this and see if I can see progress, you're more likely to stick with it over time. And you're more likely to understand whether you should just, say, no, that isn't for me, on to the next one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting what you say as well about competency, because that is one of the requirements of flow. And we know that human beings are much happier when they're able to get into a flow state. So it all kind of ties in that when you have that competency, you can finally go into the autopilot of flow and actually enjoy doing something and be on that kind of high state of flow. But you can't get there if you're still figuring out the basics of it.
Yeah, completely. And that's true in everything. Like there are these universal principles in performance. And I think the path of mastery and competency is one of them. Whether you're writing, whether you're managing a team, whether you're playing the piano, whether you're having sex, like you name it. At first, you're like in your head and you're thinking and you're trying. And then eventually it clicks in and like you're just doing the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you expect to just click in from the get-go, again, you're always disappointed and you just kind of go from one thing to the next versus digging in and really cultivating it.
I completely agree. Often the example that I like to give people, which is something just about everyone can relate to, is driving. It's like the first time you get in a car, the first 20 times you get in a car, you're checking your mirrors, you're checking the dashboard, you're not sure if you're changing gears, you don't know which pedal to hit. And today you can get in the car and you can drive an hour and a half home and be like, holy crap, I wasn't even paying attention. I was on the phone the whole time, hopefully with a hands-free device.
Yeah, spot on.
Very, very cool. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you guys a little bit about top performance hacks. I know you guys have coached and been around top performers for, it sounds like, most of your career. So what are some of the things that you guys do to remain at your top peak performance?
So I think the best hack is just hacking at it every single day. And what I mean by that is like, yes, there are these 1-2% marginal gains, but they're just that. They're marginal. And so many people strive for the marginal gains before they nail the basics. Consistency is like, that's hacking it every day. Like the best hack is showing up and doing the work. Whether you feel like doing the work, whether you don't feel like doing the work, just like get started. And on your best day, crush it. And on your shittiest day, give yourself 45 minutes. And if nothing starts to feel better, then step away, but like show up and do the work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like the best hack is the anti-hack, right? Which is like, just dig in and do it.
Yeah.
I really like that.
I'll try and give you more of a traditional hack, I guess. And I coach a lot of world-class athletes and people have been to the Olympics and all that stuff. And there's all these things on like recovery and like, to boost performance and all this stuff. But what the research shows and that what I found with my athletes is when it comes to recovery, like the basics, like sleep is obviously the most important thing. But one of the cool things or hacks is this idea called social recovery, in the sense that after you run a hard workout or go to the gym and lift a lot of weights, or even after you go into a hard writing session that lasts hours or a very difficult meeting, the best thing you can do from a recovery standpoint is actually shoot the shit with your friends. Like go hang out, have a beer, whatever. And the reason that works is because it shifts that neurochemistry, right? It takes you out of this like fight or flight stress hormone dominated state where your adrenaline is up, your cortisol is super high, and it'll shift you into this recovery state where cortisol drops, testosterone goes up a little bit, and your body can kind of naturally recover and boost performance. And actually in a lot of pro sports like NBA and stuff like that, I've talked to a lot of teams that are starting to figure out how to, after games, be like, all right, we have to almost like engineer this like social interaction. So like, let's have them bring in like nice food into the locker room so that the players can interact and all that stuff instead of going straight on their phones or straight out the door to go home.
That's really cool. So it's specifically social interaction that you find helps with that kind of recovery?
Yeah. So there was a really cool study they did a year or two ago on professional Australian rugby players, which they had them, either, interact as a group without phones and stuff, or either leave or get on their phones and just check things individually. And they looked at hormones like testosterone, cortisol, some other things. They found just what I described there. And when they looked deeper into it, it was this social interaction piece, because it's one of the things that we need. Like, we need this almost like relatedness to the people around us. And the best way to decompress after a stressful situation wasn't, getting on your cell phone and watching TV, or even, going to your couch once you got home and crashing on it. But you need this decompression period where you're almost like venting or like working through what you just went through. And like that allows you to decompress, but it also allows you to like conceptualize it and put it behind you so that it's no longer a stress situation.
That's really interesting because, for me, my go-to when I want to decompress or recover, at least mentally, emotionally, is dive into a good book or a good documentary. But I think that's a psychological thing where I think recovery is just turning off and not having to be on, especially, days where I spend hours and hours and hours recording podcasts and have to be super on intellectually and socially. But I think I should maybe try that.
Yeah, it works. I don't know the science as well as Steve, but I've implemented it for sure. And it's like, again, it's kind of paradox, right? That's our book title. It's paradoxical that like sometimes what ends up happening with super driven type A intense pushers is you finish whatever you're doing and then you try really hard to recover. And it's like trying to recover, just the trying and the effort and the strain actually gets in the way of recovery. So you can like do all these things, take supplements, take an ice bath, force yourself to meditate, when in fact, like if you just like go hang out with your friends, you're going to get the same exact internal response and perhaps even better, because trying really hard to recover almost defeats the purpose of recovery.
It's interesting as well. Your timing is really good because the other day, a few days ago, I had a really just like grind of a day and was just bummed out all day and exhausted and jet lagged. And it was a whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And then that night, I opened my door to a surprise party in my living room. And I was super happy after. And my wife said to me, she's like, it's amazing how quickly you turned around from having this crappy day. I was worried that you were going to be just like a poopy pants. So yeah, I guess you're right. It does work. And I didn't put two and two together that it was maybe specifically that type of interaction.
And it doesn't have to be like a big surprise party, although that's great. But like an example that is super timely for us right now is for our first book. We went out to the East Coast where we don't really know many people for launch week. And we did all this media stuff there. And it was almost like a bad drug high. Like at the end of it, we just felt like hollow and empty and like, geez, like this is like bizarre. And the book was doing great. So like the book was crushing it, but we're like, what? Like this just doesn't feel great. So this time around, we decided to launch the book from the Bay Area where I live and where Steve has a pretty big network. And like instead of obsessively checking our sales rank or doing like one more interview, we've been more or less shutting down in the evening and just hanging out and like getting food with our friends and our family. And we've been commenting all week, like, wow, like we're still tired and it's still a grind, but like we feel a lot better. Like tonight, we're looking forward to going to a cafe and having one of our close friends interview us versus, showing up at some random bookstore where we don't know anyone. It's just a whole different thing when you're around your people.
I think that's really interesting. I have a very dear friend who she calls it not my tribe because there's no value judgment. It's just they're in a different tribe and they're not my tribe. And I love that. And I think you're right. I think there are different classifications of friends as well. Like there are the people that intellectually stimulate you, but at the end of the day, like if you've had a really hard day, they're not the people that you would sit down with.
Yeah.
And then there are the people who just get you. That's also, I think, one of my takeaways.
Yeah. So again, like I want, and I sound like a broken record, but this is totally something that I like to beat this drum over and over. And like, it is a hack, but it's like kind of the anti-hack, right? Like hang out with friends. Nothing is simpler, but so many people don't do it because like they're chasing like this sexy technology or this thing that sounds fancy, but it's actually like the basics that are the most powerful.
Yeah. And I think that those are my two big takeaways from this episode is The first one, just understanding so much more about passion and needing to dig in your heels a little bit to see and test and date your passions. And then I'd say my other big takeaway was even if you think, I think that I'm a closeted introvert that tests as an extrovert, but even if you think that you're an introvert, test out recovery with friends instead of, I think so many of us just go into gaming or turning on Netflix, or hopefully if people are listening to this podcast, reading personal development books. Try actually getting out there with friends and seeing if you recover better that way.
Yeah, love it.
Awesome. So gentlemen, we are pretty much up on time here. I do want to give you an opportunity. We'll link people up to the book, but tell us about the book more and where you prefer for people to pick it up.
Yeah. So again, the book is called The Passion Paradox. You can buy it anywhere that books are sold. So if you've got a local bookstore that you like and is groovy, totally support them. If you prefer ordering online or you're really price sensitive, you can just get the book on Amazon pretty easily. And then you can learn more about the book at the book's website, which is passionparadoxbook.com. And then both Steve and I try to be pretty responsive on social media. So Steve is at Steve Magness and I am at B Stulberg. Hopefully y'all can tell by this conversation, but yes, we wrote the book, but our real goal is to start an engaging discussion and debate on passion, similarly to flow, because we think it's something that should be better understood. And we're hoping to jumpstart that process.
Awesome. Gentlemen, so I do want to thank you. I will ask you just one more question before I let you go, which is if people take away one big message from this whole episode, I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but what would you hope for that message to be that they carry with themselves for the rest of their lives?
Wow, that's a big question to end on. I think you nailed it on your two takeaways, but really, and this kind of goes in a different direction, but I think it's understand how to be good and nail the basics. The hacks are great, but you got to have the foundation first, right? If you don't nail the basics, then the hacks don't matter. The 1 or 2% don't matter. And I see so many people in today's age jump over all the stuff that they actually need to do to get to the 1 to 2% when they really need to own the foundation and set that up before saying, all right, I've nailed the basics. Now where do I go? Now where do I explore? And I think that would be a great takeaway.
Oh my gosh, that's so good, because I just did a productivity webinar saying exactly that all these little hacks that you read about on blogs and YouTube videos and stuff like that, they don't work when you plug them into a broken system. You got to get the base foundations right. So I love that message to end on. And there were a couple really quotable sentences there. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much. This has been such a fun episode, despite being the third of the day for me. And I do hope we keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks a ton, John. Really appreciate you having us on the show. It was a great interview, and we're definitely thinking about the same things, and they're good things to think about.
Awesome. Talk soon, guys.
Bye.
All right, super friends, that is all we have for you today, but I hope you guys really enjoyed the show, and I hope you learned a ton of actionable information, tips, advice that will help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If you've enjoyed the show, please take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or drop us a quick little note on the Twitter machine at GoSuperHuman. Also, if you have any ideas for anyone out there who you would love to see on the show, we always love to hear your recommendations. You can submit on our website, or you can just drop us an email and let us know. That's all for today, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming SuperHuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.